What's poppin', y'all? Travis Scott recently found himself in another feud for number one, this time with alleged pop star Sabrina Carpenter. We'll get into the alleged in a little bit. Don't worry about that for some people that may have been triggered by that. His album now, formerly a mixtape, Days Before Rodeo 2014, that was the premier project that put Travis Scott on the map, in my humble opinion, was being brought to streaming platforms after 10 years, and it was battling Sabrina Carpenter's album Short and Sweet for the number one spot. Keep in mind, before we get into things, there's no previous history between Travis Scott and Sabrina Carpenter. They've never collaborated. I don't even think they've done anything with someone that's 1 degree of separation from each other. So they're probably at least 2 degrees of separation apart. However, what kicked this off was the news that Travis Scott and Sabrina Carpenter would be battling for number one. Now, this was reported in multiple different outlets, but on chart data, they said Hits Daily Double suggests Travis Scott could spoil Sabrina Carpenter's chances at number one on the Billboard 200. Scott, known for rocking massive D2C direct-to-consumer sales, could play the part of spoiler if those final numbers come in stronger than projected. Sabrina currently leads by 100K. And then what does Sabrina Carpenter tweet on August 30th? She says, "This one's for Nicki." Now, Sabrina Carpenter's never done anything with Nicki Minaj. They don't have any music together. And this is an important point that we're going to have to circle back to when I get to the other points that I'm trying to illustrate.
Oh, and shout out to Sabrina Carpenter. Shout out to all the Sabrina Carpenter fans. Yes.
So Nicki Minaj ends up responding to this. So as you guys just saw in that clip, she shouts out the Sabrina Carpenter fan. She's like, oh yeah, shout out to her and all that. Now, there is an interesting history between Travis Scott and Nicki Minaj. There was some beef there. I would say it's one-sided coming from Nicki Minaj's side, but this circles all the way back to 2018. Travis Scott would debut at number one already the prior week with Astroworld, but Nicki Minaj was going to release her album Queen the second week, and she would end up going number two to Travis Scott's second week. And Astroworld sold 205,000 equivalent units with 78,000 from traditional sales. And Queen sold 185,000 units and 78,000 were from traditional sales. Now, 78,000 being traditional sales means they were not from streaming. So they were, at this point in time, it was bundles. You could bundle a digital album with merchandise, whether it's a t-shirt, hat, whatever the case may be, and then people would get the digital album sent to their email, but they really just wanted to buy the merch for the most part. And they would never open up the digital album. They wouldn't do anything with it. They were just going to stream it on a regular streaming platform. So this was how people really boosted up sales, and how Travis Scott sold like 550 or more thousand first week with Astroworld. So Nicki Minaj was really upset at going number two here. This was the first album that she had released in a very long time, and she wanted it to go number one. And she went on a rant with the following. Travis sold over 50K of these with no requirement of redeeming the album, with no dates for a tour, etc. I spoke to him. He knows he doesn't have the number one album this week. I love my fans for the number one album in America. I'll explain on Queen Radio. 4 albums in, number one in 86 countries. And she's talking about the Wish You Were Here bundle that Kylie Jenner posted on her Instagram. She would continue on to rant. I put my blood, sweat, and tears in writing a dope album only for Travis Scott to have Kylie Jenner post a tour pass telling people to come see her and Stormy. LOL, I'm actually laughing. Queen broke the record of being number one in 86 countries. Thank Jesus and thank you to my fans. At this point, Nicki Minaj wasn't so favored with the general hip-hop community, so general male hip-hop fans, they just preferred Travis Scott and felt like she was being salty, partially because they didn't have the full story, but she was being a little bit salty, which we'll get into later. So she says, Spotify put Drake's face on every playlist, but told me they'd have to teach me a lesson for playing my music 10 minutes early on Queen Radio, even though they've been giving away my music for free for years, and I'm one of the top Spotify artists of all time. This is a very interesting point that Nicki Minaj made, which is that Queen Radio was a radio show that she had on Apple Music. At this time, the streaming wars were still kind of going on. Apple was trying to get as many subscribers as possible because they came out in 2015, way late in comparison to Spotify. So Spotify and Apple were beefing, and for her to play her music early on Queen Radio, people were already on the Apple Music platform. They would probably just tune into it immediately after Queen Radio as opposed to streaming it on Spotify. So that's a very important point that Nicki Minaj made with good validity, even though most of her points across here are valid. Spotify had to teach me a lesson, but rewarded the man who has had an Apple radio show the longest. This is in reference to Drake, who she is cool with. And she has a good point here. But Drake is just so much bigger. Inadvertently helping the Apple platform the most. True. Oh, I can't wait for Queen Radio on Tuesday. They took away my promotion they had promised for the first couple days because of this. Hashtag Queen. Nicki Minaj goes on Queen Radio and rants at Travis Scott. I'll play you guys this clip. It's funny.
The week, of course, is Travis Scott. Woo! Travis Scott on Thursday, when he realized the Queen was about to have the #1 album in America, he and his label decided to have Kylie and baby Stormy put up a tour pass. He had her go and post and say, hey, me and Stormy can't wait to see y'all. How are you selling something that does not have anything to do with your album, but is being counted on Billboard as album sales? But what we not going to do is have this auto-tune man coming up here selling sweaters and telling y'all he sold 500,000 albums, because he didn't. And it's a lot of rappers behind the scene that want to talk about it, and they're scared. But sweetheart, I'm not scared. I'm legendary in these streets. I'm legendary in these streets. I'm legend. I'm legend. I'm legend. Oh. Okay. Now, Travis Scott, you better. Travis Scott, you played your self also for having your friend come on the internet talking up for you. You stupid. You're a man. You got your homeboy talking for you, and you got your girlfriend posting tour passes saying you sold albums. Stop it. Knock it the Queen Radio.
Now, there's no way you can say that Nicki Minaj was cool with Travis. She calls him hoe of the week. She goes in on him. She says, knock it off. She really goes in. Disrespectful towards Travis Scott here. Travis Scott doesn't really say much. But Smoke Perp, he would go on to call out Nicki Minaj. Now, I know people are saying, Smoke Perp? What the hell? I haven't heard that name in like 6 years or a couple of years. And you would be right. But at this point in time, Smoke Perp was hot. This is 2018. And he was set to potentially sign to Cactus Jack Records. He had a song that was coming out with Travis Scott, or had come out at the time. I'm not going to check the dates on that. It was the same year. Really not important to the point that he makes, but I'll play that clip for you guys right now, and he defends Travis's album sales.
Hey, Nicki Minaj, you bugging. You bugging by saying that Travis Scott is cheating because he's selling clothes and stuff. It's called marketing, my nigga. Like, you're doing the most first week. Don't hate on the next man. He did, and you said the Billboard was wrong, this, blah, blah, blah. You probably got it delayed yourself. And it's no disrespect. I fuck with you. I fuck with your music. You go crazy. But numbers do not lie.
I will disagree with Smoke Perp on here. This is not marketing. This is 100% sales. This is not promoting people to listen to Travis Scott's album or to buy his album. This was inadvertently getting people to buy albums they didn't even really know they were buying. So this was not marketing, this was sales. I don't think there was anything wrong with it. Keep that in mind. But this is just inaccurate by Smoke Perp, to say the least. And even Academics, who has been critical of bundles more recently, went in on Nicki Minaj, saying that she did the same thing. Keep in mind, Academics and Nicki Minaj have had their feuds. At this time, the feud was potentially at its peak when it came to how disrespectful it was getting. So I'll play that clip for you guys right now, where Academics explained that Nicki tried to do the same thing Travis Scott did, which is what she said, selling things that have nothing to do with your album to boost your sales.
Billboard actually honored those. Here's the thing, because this has been done before. Billboard honored these without a requirement for fans to redeem. Like, actually, Nicki's trying to do the same thing, or tried. Her label just didn't do it right or did it like how Travis Scott did it. Because when you buy a ticket to Nicki Minaj's tour, you get a redeemable almost code which you could use to get a free copy of her album Queen. Except the fan has to do the physical work of going to the service and then put the code in just to get the album, then it could count. With Travis Scott's situation, you didn't have to do but buy the merch, okay? Now, here's the big difference. For example, in Nicki's case, say 50,000 people bought some tickets, right? Probably 1,000 will actually go through with the process of redeeming the code for albums. You know why? Most people stream, most people ain't doing a digital, or most people already have the album, that's why they're buying tour tickets, right? So basically, you get a 100% conversion ratio from how Travis Scott did it, and in Nicki Minaj, because she didn't do it right, and by the way, she tried to do it at the end, it just got rejected, and her label was too shook to fight. She said all this on Twitter, by the way. So, she's kind of salty to say, damn, how did his finesse work and mine didn't work? What's the problem? Again, these are label tricks and shenanigans. In reality, Travis Scott ain't sell that much. He sold a lot of clothes. In reality, Nicki Minaj ain't sell that much. She had a Fifi, gave away free on title, and also was trying to sell clothes. And tickets, and tour tickets, by the way. All of y'all are mad at the same that y'all all are trying to do. And y'all not trying to be mad because you're so wholesome and you don't do it. You're mad because somebody else did it better, okay?
I thought that this was the perfect explanation for everything. Nicki Minaj was just upset that things didn't work out in her favor because she would have won had people not needed to redeem the album. That's just an extra step that most people won't do. And Travis Scott, when they were bundling the digital album with the product, they could just buy it right away and they wouldn't have to redeem an album or put in a code. So that really gave him a lot more sales. So this would lead to Travis Scott really trying to stay away from Nicki Minaj because at the VMAs, Travis Scott wanted to sit away from her. So according to TMZ, they said Travis Scott and the VMAs are taking musical chairs to a whole new level. Travis is on the move after originally being seated behind Nicki Minaj, a decision that raised eyebrows in the wake of Nicki going nuclear over Travis beating her out for the top spot on the Billboard chart. Sources tell TMZ Travis will now sit on the opposite side of the room from Nicki. We're told it's more about avoiding bad optics. Travis has the top album and shouldn't sit behind the artist with the number 2 spot, and not about fear of retaliation or continued beef from Nicki. I think this was hilarious. Why would him sitting behind her doesn't mean anything when it comes to optics of the number 1 album sitting behind the number 2 album? What? It was definitely because he didn't want any confrontation. And as we've seen in the past, Travis Scott really tries to avoid confrontation as much as possible with other artists. Remember when Tory Lanez pulled up on him in that tour bus? It wasn't a tour bus. It was a trailer, in his trailer, and he was getting all up in his face, and Travis Scott was trying to defuse the situation. Same thing with Meek Mill at the White Party with Dave Rubin. Travis Scott tried to defuse the situation. However, when Travis Scott is dealing with someone that isn't rich or famous, he tends to wild out like crazy. But that's neither here nor there. Nicki Minaj also goes on to say in an interview in 2018 when she was on Ellen that she wanted to punch Travis Scott after Queen failed to go number 1. So she was very angry. Yet, years later, in 2023, Nicki Minaj seemed to have patched up the beef with Travis Scott because she would go on Kai Cenat's stream and show some praise in the following clip.
I was at this Travis Scott concert.
Travis is on the album.
I know.
Pink Birthday. Shout out to Travis Scott.
Pink, if you didn't hear the album yet, go get the album. T. Scott, he's a good guy. He's a great guy.
I appreciate him from the bottom of my heart. That he just was.
Yeah.
Not being petty and spiteful and shit.
So you clearly hear her saying, oh, Travis wasn't being petty or spiteful. And Travis Scott even liked the tweet where Nicki Minaj said, fun fact about Pink Birthday, Travis Scott cleared his vocals for it. That's his voice on it. It sounds kind of like an instrument. I didn't know until I had already recorded and fell in love with it though. I was like, he not gonna clear it. I believe her. She didn't know that it was initially Travis. So after that, she's probably like, damn, let's see if he can clear it. And Travis Scott cleared it. So it shows that there was no issue from his side. He chose not to be petty. And then doesn't it look a little bit petty when Nicki Minaj shouts out Sabrina Carpenter, shows her love? Sure, when she says shout out Sabrina Carpenter, she knows. I don't think Nicki Minaj totally knew what she was doing, but she knows the context of how this looks. So there is a recent shift with the beef kind of being over between Nicki Minaj and Travis Scott towards the end of 2023, leading into 2024. We also know that Nicki Minaj's Barbs are arguably the strongest fan base, female fan base, I would say. Like, there are a lot of dudes that are in that fan base too. But when you're talking about like Kanye West, right? He's got arguably the strongest. Nicki Minaj, very, very strong fan base, very active. They buy, they stream. If Nicki Minaj puts her support behind someone, they're going to do everything that they can to make sure that album, project, whatever the single succeeds. So that's why I think it's odd for Sabrina Carpenter to involve Nicki. I think she wanted to specifically activate Nicki Minaj's fans and the Barbs to help support her, help buy her albums, help stream her songs so she could go number one, because she couldn't do it herself, or she didn't believe that she would be able to do it herself. So she needed help from the Barbs. And this is smart from Sabrina Carpenter, but it also goes to show how, I would say, weird it is to a degree, because we've never seen Sabrina Carpenter shout out Nicki Minaj ever. We've never seen them in a photo together, and they've probably had the opportunity to make this happen. Do I think Sabrina Carpenter was a Nicki Minaj fan? I think Sabrina Carpenter probably enjoyed some Nicki Minaj songs in the past. Of course, who hasn't? She's had smash hits. But it just comes off very disingenuous, or as Flight would say, disingenuous to me. Now, Travis Scott's strategy for this Days Before Rodeo competing with Sabrina Carpenter was interesting, and it's always beautiful to see a Travis Scott rollout, because you know they're squeezing every single last drop of juice out of that orange. So he dropped a Days Before Rodeo Deluxe, I think an exclusive version with 4 extra songs. He dropped a chopped and screwed version. He dropped a standard edition for digital download. He also dropped vinyls and CDs. So he dropped a special edition vinyl, which I bought. I'm one of the people that contributed to one of Travis Scott's album sales. I just saw the cover. I was like, yo, this is an exclusive cover. I want this. I wasn't going to get the original, but my reasoning for that is I love Days Before Rodeo. Just but a little bit of lore from my side. Days Before Rodeo, I went to the tour. So it was the rodeo tour. I went to both shows. It was on one day. They had 2 shows in New York City. So I went to rodeo tour. Travis Scott's performance was insane. It was a smaller venue. It's indescribable how crazy that show was. I love the show. Young Thug was also there. I was more of a Young Thug supporter back then. I was just lightly listening to Travis Scott. But that was a crazy tour. I loved that project. I just kept listening to that mixtape. So it's got a special, part of me. No diddy, no homo. That I wanted to have some memorabilia associated with it. And I believe that's the same case for many people. Like, this is 10 years old. This is history. A lot of people grew up. A lot of people were teenagers when this came out. A lot of people maybe were preteens when it came out. So now a lot of those people, they finally get to stream it, number one, and they get to buy something physical that reminds them of that moment of their lives and this project. Of course they're going to do it. And that's why I did. Also, Kanye West shared the Days Before Rodeo release on his Instagram. And then there was the midweek projection that Travis Scott could potentially take the number 1 spot. What I didn't like, though, was Hits Daily Double's criticism of Travis Scott for the tactics that he was using on Days Before Rodeo. So they would drop these snarky comments and quotes in their articles. I'll read some of them for you right now. That a 10-year-old SoundCloud mixtape with an SEA streaming equivalent album of about 30K units could have come within inches of taking the number 1 chart spot from the hottest pop act in the business only underscores how broken the current system is. We'll get into this statement a little bit later, because this really had me raising both eyebrows. And it says, the charts are royally effed up. Billboard's Luminate has decimated the significance of its story chart, once the richest metric of the state of play in the biz. The jockeying for number 1, the only spot on the chart that matters anymore, has too often become a contest of manipulation as combatants scramble for one-off tricks like gamers deploying cheat codes. Is selling physical albums a cheat code? Is selling music. This is music that's being sold. It's not merchandise that's being sold. It's not tickets that are being sold. It's not tickets being bundled with merchandise. It's not albums being bundled with merchandise or tickets. It's actual music that is being sold, just like it was historically. I don't think that's cheating. And yes, someone being willing to buy an album outright in whatever format, digital or physical, is way more valuable and should be weighted a lot more than streaming an album. Unfortunately, Travis Scott would end up losing by 1,300 units overall, and he would go number 2, albeit selling 361,000 units first week. Now, if we look at the exact numbers, 362,000 overall was Sabrina Carpenter's sales, and 184,000 of that was pure sales. So she was doing the same tactics that Travis Scott was doing, despite these people trying to like clown it. She was using the same tactics for 184,000 of her sales. So about half of her sales came from physical formats, signed, whatever the case may be. And the project was streamed 233 million times. And they made sure to let people know it's the number 1 album on both streaming and vinyl sales. They said the vinyl sales combined 105,000. So she sold 105,000 vinyls for this. Now, when we look at Travis Scott, he sold 361,000 units, but only 30,000 came from streaming. 331,000 came from vinyls, whatever else Travis Scott was out here selling. But Travis Scott's team was not happy with this and believed that there was some meddling from Luminate, which is the company that gives out these numbers, collects it, and then lets Billboard know who really went number 1. And says in this excerpt, Cactus Jack's letter adds that it is especially concerning that the Luminate employee who Cactus Jack and Single corresponded with had previously worked for Carpenter's label Island Records, alleging he would have a personal incentive for Carpenter to earn a number 1. Occam's razor principle dictates the explanation that requires the fewest assumptions is usually correct, the letter says. According to the employee's LinkedIn, he left Island in May of 2021, 4 months after the label signed Carpenter in January. Vulture has reached out to the employee. And the employee they're talking about is Nelson Thomas. Luminate exec is responsible for the business' exhausting holiday weekend. In a related story, is anyone interested in a gently used $4.99 digital download? Man, that is a very corporate joke. So they just show his experience. You see Luminate full-time. He worked there from 2023 to present. And before that, he was at Island Records from October 19th to 2021. So they had barely signed Sabrina Carpenter. This was May 2021. They signed her in January, so 4 months. And we're going to get into Sabrina Carpenter's career in a little bit, but he worked at Spotify after that. I really don't think this is a matter of Luminate or this guy cheating. And I think Occam's razor is more so she just was able to get more units. That's it. But they did say that he had a couple of units that they didn't want to show. Travis Scott's team said they showed proof of 1,300 units that would have gotten him a number 1, but they were ignored by the employee. I think that's possible. I think they could have robbed him, but I don't think it's that employee's fault. He may have just gotten the news from upstairs to chill out. But Hits Daily Double would also throw some more shots at Travis Scott, saying, the history of the charts is also a history of skullduggery. Back in the bad old days, terms like bagman, free goods, and boxes of cleans were bandied about as labels jockeyed for chart advantage in an era of virtually zero transparency. Chart manipulation in the present era requires a different set of licit, illicit, and semi-licit shenanigans. The difference between cheating and outside-the-box marketing often depends on a rather nebulous set of rules. Which brings us to the contentious chart battle between Sabrina Carpenter and Travis Scott, Cactus Jack. So it says, buoyed by 2 years' biggest singles when it talks about Short and Sweet, Days Before Rodeo. And then they talk about exclusive signed digital copies and late in the week arrival of more vintage Travis Scott material were key to Travis's overtime campaign. So they were working later in the week to get things done. And I think they may have just potentially missed a deadline. That's my honest belief, honest assumption. And then the update that Hits Daily Double takes more shots. Island Sabrina Carpenter has prevailed after a protracted chart battle with Cactus Jack Epic taking 362K over Travis Scott's 361K, the overwhelming majority of which was in pure album sales. Yeah, so was half of Sabrina Carpenter's album. Like, what are we doing here? And this is the funniest thing, circling back to that previous moment when they said, oh, the hottest and number 1 pop act. Let's be honest here. Let me pull the numbers up for you guys. What do you guys think? She just went number 1, right? Let's just do a quick assumption, because most of y'all are a hip-hop audience. You probably don't even remember Sabrina Carpenter or know too much about Sabrina Carpenter, right? What do you think Sabrina Carpenter's last album sold first week? Just take a wild guess. Maybe even write it in the comments. Her last album debuted at number 23, and it sold 18,000 the first week. It was Emails I Can't Send. In 2022, on Island Records, it went number 23. 18K first week. Tell me that's not hilarious. Oh, this is the number one pop act since when? If you look at her previous albums, in July of 2019, she dropped Singular Act, which is Singular Act 2, which went 138 on the charts. And then Singular Act 1, 103 on the charts. And that's not 103K, 138K. That's position 103, position 138, which is probably under 10K first week. And she was at a different record label at this time. So we got to get rid of this notion or idea that, oh, this is one of the hottest pop acts. No, they've been trying to get this chick popping for years, for 10 years, like I said earlier. Let's also take a look at her Spotify listeners, because she's had a ton of monthly listeners. She's had these big songs. What's interesting is that these songs, they never blow up in America first. Let's just take a look at Sabrina Carpenter's Spotify. And very important, let's look at what regions are listening to her the most. So if you look at the most listened cities for Sabrina Carpenter, number 1 is Jakarta, Indonesia. Number 2 is London, Great Britain. Number 3 is Sydney, Australia. Number 4 is Quezon City, Philippines. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And number 5 is Los Angeles, US. So she's selling 361,000 in the US, yet it's the 5th most listened to city. That's the highest. The first city in America that is the most listened to is the 5th, number 5 in all of her listenings. And this has been going on for a very long time. I keep in touch with these things. Yet, if you were to take a look at Travis Scott, and keep in mind, Billboard only counts for US-based sales. If you take a look at Travis Scott, it makes a little bit more sense, right? You've got London as number 1, you've got Los Angeles as number 2, but you've got Jakarta, Indonesia there, Sao Paulo, Brazil there, and Chicago. So you've got 2 US cities in the top 5. But I do think it's very interesting that a lot of people say there are a ton of bots in Indonesia. And here we have both Travis and Sabrina Carpenter. Sabrina Carpenter, number 1, being Indonesia, with all of these listeners in Indonesia. Now, I'm not saying that they're using bots. I'm not saying that Sabrina Carpenter used bots for this album, because she does have had a number 1 song. She has 2 smash hits right now that I believe are organically going up after a ton of money was being dropped on them. And they're charting in the US, people are listening to them, etc., even though they may have blown up somewhere else. But what we're not going to do is pretend that Sabrina Carpenter is this superstar that has a huge fan base. And keep in mind, this is a 10-year-old album. Travis Scott with 10-year-old music, no new songs, other than you could say like these versions of songs that people had never heard of. But I didn't buy any of that stuff. Almost outsold Sabrina Carpenter, who's supposedly this number 1 pop act according to Hits Daily Double. And she currently has an album with multiple chart-topping songs. So the fact that Travis Scott even came close, regardless of what he was selling, which he was selling albums, this goes to show how much stronger of a fan base Travis Scott has than this woman. Because if Travis Scott had new music, oh man, it would be over with. Because let's just take into consideration, I'll leave that point for a little bit. Nicki Minaj's role in Impact, I believe, was integral to her taking number 1. And she gets congratulated by Nicki Minaj. So Nicki Minaj sent Sabrina Carpenter flowers after she beat Travis Scott for number 1. And Sabrina Carpenter posted to her story saying, "I adore you at Nicki Minaj and the Barbs. This is so thoughtful. And these are so beautiful." I think this is doing Travis Scott greasy after he cleared the, not verse, but the vocals, his own vocals for Nicki Minaj. I really think so. Nicki Minaj didn't really have to do too much after this. And I think Nicki Minaj is happy. While Travis Scott may not have been petty to clear Nicki Minaj's song, I'm sure Nicki Minaj is still petty and upset about Queen going number 2. And for her, she's like, yeah, I'm glad Travis Scott didn't get a number 1 with this, because a number 1 on a mixtape, 10 years old, that's really, really impressive. And for anybody which it's unlikely that we get real pop stands here that are going to be fighting for Sabrina Carpenter over Travis Scott. But for anybody that wants to play like, yo, Travis Scott got beat by this pop star and they're trying to sell this image that Sabrina Carpenter is bigger, how about we go to new music, right? How about we circle back to Utopia? That was new music. That was a rollout. And let's take a look at Utopia's album sales. It sold about 500,000 first week, 496,000. Like Hits Daily Double said, they said, oh, nah, most of that wasn't even streaming. It was bundles or physical albums or box sets. Okay, 252,000 of those units were in pure album sales. So let's take off that 252,000. What does that leave us with? About 242, 243, let's just say 245,000, right? 245,000 streaming units first week. How much did Sabrina Carpenter just do? Oh, 180,000. So Sabrina Carpenter, with smash hit songs, multiple of them, with the whole pop machine behind her, does 180,000 first week streaming equivalent. But Travis Scott, Utopia, does 245,000 streaming equivalent. So he does about 60,000 more with less hits. He didn't have multiple chart-topping songs. He didn't have a number one song before Utopia came out. Realistically, like the song that he released, K-pop, that was somewhat of a flop. They tried to make that the single, and Echoes was another song, but the album drops, and then singles and hits are really picked by the fans. We had, what became a hit out of that? We had, of course, the song Fiend with Travis Scott and Playboi Carti, and we had I Know, that went crazy. We could say those are the big songs from there that fans chose as like, yo, these are the bangers. He had the song with Drake too. And My Eyes. Did I say My Eyes? Yeah, My Eyes, I Know. Like these songs came afterwards. So he didn't have these smash chart-topping hits off rip that she had. And he still outstreamed her by a significant margin if we're considering just streaming equivalent albums. So the notion that, oh, she's bigger than Travis Scott, we got to toss that out. Like she damn near got washed by an old album. And to expect even close to competition numbers, even close to 50, 100K of an album that was already released, of music that people have already heard for 10 years, to compete is a joke. And I wouldn't say it's disrespectful, but it's making an unfair comparison. So if we're to look over everything, right? Sabrina Carpenter versus Travis Scott wins. The fact that he was even in competition means he wins. He's got a bigger fan base. I imagine his tours are bigger. Who knows after this hit songs that Sabrina Carpenter has had. Nicki Minaj, if we're being honest, she did some shady behavior, but I do think Sabrina Carpenter activated Nicki Minaj's stands, and Nicki Minaj knows when her stands are being used. So I think this benefited Nicki Minaj on the sly. I do think it's a little bit shady and petty behavior taken towards Travis Scott from Nicki Minaj. And I think the most impressive thing of all of this is the success that Days Before Rodeo as a brand, as a product, not let's just say the music, the product of Days Before Rodeo, which includes the music, was able to generate 361,000 sales. That is impressive, and that's a testament to the longevity of that album. And this is competing with a fresh pop album that has multiple hits on the Hot 100 that's being worked through radio, TikTok, everything. This Days Before Rodeo thing was just bam. We just dropped this. You guys remember this album? Oh yeah, well, buy this stuff. And people went out there and bought it, me included. So I think this does show the dynamic. This was like a pop/hip hop battle. And I felt that Nicki Minaj leaned more towards the pop side. And I felt like anybody that was hating on Travis Scott or critical of Travis Scott leaned more towards the pop side here. They were using the same tactics. Travis Scott just did it better. And do I think he was robbed? I believe there's a potential. But like I said earlier, I think they just scrambled too late and tried to get these numbers in, and the window was closed. That's my honest belief. Hey, if anybody shows me otherwise, actual proof, I'll change my opinion. You guys already know where I stand on this. I definitely support Travis Scott more than Sabrina Carpenter. And my belief is still that whoever is able to sell the most physical units is and deserves to be, at least for that week, number one or ranked higher. We can't manipulate physical sales. Sure, people could buy it and store a lot of it, but that's really, really difficult. I'm sure they have a good method of looking into that. But I think Luminate's rules now, where they've limited it to, you have to have the albums and all of this stuff in stock before selling it. That means you need to know and be able to estimate how much product people are going to buy. Because let's say you only bought 100,000, yet you sold 350,000 that week. You only get 100,000 in sales that count because you don't have the other 250,000 in stock. So I think this is a very, very, very good method of tracking albums. I think it's the most fair, and whoever is able to do the most with this deserves to win. Even Taylor Swift. I think Taylor Swift doing 2.6 million, like a 1.9 million of that coming from these vinyls and other box sets. I think that's fair, and I think that's a testament to how strong her fan base is. Like, doesn't Taylor Swift's fan base feel 5 times as strong as Travis Scott's? I think so. And that's demonstrated in her sales, which include purchases. But let me know what you guys think about all this in the comments. Like and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you enjoyed. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you for watching. Peace.